Hi, my name's Robert. I come to you as an automobile enthusiast that have maintained, serviced, and repaired my own vehicles in excess of 30 years. I've had a car that lasts over 400,000 miles. The current car that I'm driving has over 220,000 miles on it. It's a 95 model. So I hope you can benefit from the information I share. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, as you can see behind me, I have a 2008 Kia Rio, I think. I'm not sure the motor size. I'm going to check in a second. I'm going to replace the timing belt on it, the idler pulley, and the tensioner pulley, and get this thing. It's overdue. It's supposed to be done at 70,000 miles. I think it has about 83,000 miles on it now. So the first thing I'm going to do is break the lug nuts loose. Then I'm going to set the parking brake, jack the car up, put a jack stand under it, and pull the front wheel off. And then I'm going to pop the hood and take a look inside. Alright, here's the tools I use to do the timing belt on that Kia. The only thing I don't have here is the jack stand. I had a regular screwdriver. I got a 3/8 12 millimeter. I got a 17 deep well. I got a 10 millimeter for that pulley. I got an open end 12 and 13. 1/4 inch socket for a couple things, 3/8 socket. I used this crescent wrench to turn my water pump pulley when I needed to line that back up. I got a 1/2 inch drive 14. I got a 12 1/4, a 10 3/8, a 12 3/8, a 13 3/8. I use this to get to the alternator belt and then a short extension. So not a whole lot of tools, and you can get that job done on that timing belt. Okay, I use the tools from the car jack to jack the car up. There's the scissor jack there. It should be seated in the little A-frame. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the wheel. I already got the lug nuts broke loose and the parking brake is set. Then I'll put the jack stand under the car. Okay, I'm going to leave the jack in place. I have the jack stand in place under the frame. Car is kind of too low to use the top of the jack stand. This will be a good time to check some of your suspension parts, your control arm linkages and boots. Make sure they look fine, and your axle boots. Make sure your axle boots look in good shape. You can see the crank pulley bolt through there. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can see your lower control arm bushings there. You can see if they're cracked or torn. You could also try to wiggle the wheel to see if those things move at all. I'm going to go ahead and pop the hood and see what we're working with there. Couldn't get to this tensioner pulley on the air conditioner from up top, so I'm going to have to do it from down the bottom. And there's a splash pan or something, a splash guard in front of the crank. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these two 10 millimeter bolts and see if that comes off, and I'll pick back up from there. Okay, it says it's a 16 valve motor, which is double overhead cam. I got a front timing belt cover here. I'm going to try to take that off first. Then I got a motor mount here that'll have to be moved out of the way. So I'm going to support the motor under the car with a scissor jack and a wood block. I got a power steering pump with a belt on it I'm going to have to remove. I have an alternator belt down here that's going to have to be removed, and I see the alternator slack bolt there. And then on the back side, looks like I got the air conditioning belt that's going to have to be removed or taken loose, and there's a pulley down there on that. So I'm going to try to take this cover off first. Looks like I got a couple of 10 millimeters. Then I'm going to pull the cover off, crank the motor so I can make sure I know the direction of the belt, and go from there. Okay, before I pulled those bolts loose, I went under the car and I installed a brace for under the motor. I put a 2x6 under the oil pan. I used a scissor jack. Jack that up until I felt pressure on the oil pan. You don't want to put too much pressure on there. So I didn't try to jack the car up. I just wanted to support it. Then I came up and pulled those bolts out of that mount on top of the motor. So now I'm going to try to lift this motor mount up it seems a little snug, so I'm going to try to break that free and get that mount out of the way. Okay, I pulled the top two covers out of the front upper timing belt cover. It did not budge. I looked down, that cover is wrapped around this mount of some sort. So I'm going to pull this 17 millimeter bolt and pull these three 14 millimeter bolts with my 1/2 inch socket, extension, breaker bar, and breaker bar there. Pull that mount off. I'm going to leave it connected to that ground strap. I'll probably lay it over the air conditioning lines and then try to get that timing belt cover off again. Okay, I grabbed this rubber bump stop, wiggled this mount, and then it did lift up and out of the way. Now I'm going to try to pull this timing belt cover off again. Heck, it may have, look like it's got a couple more bolts in it. So I'm going to pull this bolt right here behind this wire harness and see if that timing belt cover comes off then. Here's the front timing belt cover, the upper cover. You got a bolt here, a bolt here, a bolt down here under the belt for the water pump. I'm sorry, the power steering fluid. And then you got a bolt down here on a wire harness. You got to take those 4 bolts out to get this upper cover off, but the cover is probably not going to come off until you pull the belt for the power steering pump. And that power steering pump, you loosen the bolt here, and then you loosen the bolt on the back side of it here to get it to pivot in, to get the belt off and to get the front of the cover off. So when you go back on, you'll have to put this cover on before you put this belt on. Okay, I got the cover off. This is a single cam motor, so it may not be interference. I was under the impression that it was interference. Maybe it's not. I got the cover off, and the cover has a seal on it, and that seal fits in the groove of the cover. So you want to make sure that's placed back in, especially before you put that cover back on. So I'm going to go ahead, crank the motor, make sure this thing is turning clockwise up here, then shut it off, and continue with aligning the timing marks and getting this thing out of here. Okay, that is turning clockwise. You can see the looseness in that timing belt, so I'm glad that's being replaced. So I'm going to go ahead and shut it off and get this thing timed. I see in the video it looks like it's turning counterclockwise, but it's actually turning clockwise. So I'm going to pull these accessory belts and then time the motor and then get the rest of that belt off. Since I turned the car off and I know which way the motor turns, I'm going to go over here before I start disconnecting anything else. I'm going to disconnect the negative from the battery cable, and that's a 10 millimeter nut on that. So I went on ahead and disconnected the battery. That's the crank bolt. It's a 22 millimeter. You want to try to break that loose, preferably before you pull all those other belts off. If it'll come loose with everything on there, that's great. If not, you're going to have to wedge something in there or get an impact wrench to get that bolt loose. It comes loose counterclockwise. Okay, on the power steering pump, I got the aligned pulley here. I could reach this bolt through here with a 12 millimeter. I took that loose several turns. Then on the back, I got another 12 millimeter here that I put the ratchet on. I put the ratchet on and turned loose so that that's loose. Then the tension fell off of that power steering pump. Now I'm going to go down here and get the alternator loose and then the air conditioner pulley loose. Get those belts off and out of the way. Okay, I had to take that bolt loose right there to pivot the alternator, because when I took it loose up top, it would not pivot out of the way. So I broke that bolt loose. As you can see, it's at the end of its threads, right there behind the oil filter. I took the bolt loose right there on top of the alternator, got the bracket loose. So now that belt should be loose enough to pivot the alternator to get that belt off of the crank, alternator, and water pump there. Okay, that's an idler tensioner pulley for that air conditioner belt. I'm going to go ahead and pull that. If you look at that belt real close, that belt is cracked up. So I'm going to get a new belt for that. And I'm going to also break this crank pulley loose, because I'm going to have to take that off to get the timing belt off. And when I come back up here and look at these other two belts, the belt that had that water pump on, that thing's cracked really bad too. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the belt for the power steering as well. Not sure if you can see those cracks there, but they're pretty bad on this belt. So I'm going to replace these two belts. The belt that went around the alternator, it looks fine, so I'm not going to replace it. Okay, that's the air conditioning pulley. I had a 14 millimeter there. I broke that loose. Then I came down here and took the 12 millimeter bolt, took the tension off of it to remove that pulley off of the air conditioning. After you got all the other belts off, you want to go ahead and turn that crank clockwise with the 22 millimeter ratchet and extension. And then you want to come up here and line up the cam sprocket. This blue thing, you want that pointing 12 o'clock. If you look down here, you can see a little hole in there. And behind that hole is a red mark. I believe that mark's tapped dead center. So you want to line that up before you pull that harmonic balancer off and start taking the rest of that belt loose. I got this crank pulley bolt loose. I want to go up top, check the timing, make sure the timing's on before I take that all the way off. Up here, my timing is still pointed at 12 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that crank pulley off and go from there. Some people actually pull the spark plugs so that they can turn the engine over easier. On an engine this small, I just didn't think it'd have that much compression that it would matter much. So I'm going to pull that crank pulley off down there, then pull that lower belt cover off. Okay, with the timing lined up top, this crank pulley is about at 3 o'clock. It has a little key there. I worked the pulley off, so it came off. Be careful not to lose or drop anything there. Then there's a dust cap here that comes off too. So I went on ahead and worked that off. Now I can actually see the crank behind there with the timing belt. So I see 3 or 4 bolts on there on that lower cover. I'm going to go ahead and pull that cover off. Okay, now to get the lower timing belt cover off, you need to go ahead and pull the 4 bolts out of the water pump pulley. Okay, I got that lower timing belt cover off. As you can see, it had 5 bolts in it. 1, 2, and then 1 behind here and 1 over here behind the water pump. Okay, once I got that lower timing belt cover off, I could actually see the crank pulley mark. I got a yellow mark on the crank, and then just up inside the crank there's a nipple against the motor there. So that's the lower timing mark. In case this stuff gets off, you can make sure you get it back on. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take the tensioner roller loose. I got a bolt right here and a bolt right there. So I'm going to take the tension bolt loose first, and then I'm going to work on getting this spring loose, and then taking that bolt off to take the tension off the belt. After I get the tension off the belt, I'll work it off and then take the idler roller up top off. Well, I went on ahead and took the bolt loose from the spring, pulled it out far enough that it came loose. Then I took the other bolt out. Then the belt's loose enough, so I went on ahead and pulled it off the crankshaft down here. And I'll pull it off from up top and then measure it with the new belt. Alright, so I come up here up top, and the belt's pretty loose, so I'm just going to work it off here. Pull it off the idler and measure it with the other one. That idler just has 1 bolt in the middle there, so I'm going to pull that belt off and replace that idler. Not sure what the torque value is, but I'm going to try to put it on as tight as it is that it takes me to get it off. Here's a new idler roller. If I take and spin it, you can see it stops spinning immediately. If I take the old one and spin it, it'll keep spinning for a few seconds. So I'm not sure if that will last another 70,000 miles or not. It's best to just replace these rollers, especially if you're doing the job yourself. It's not worth the risk of these bearings going out on you in the middle of a timing belt interval. Because if this goes out, the timing belt will jump time. I just took these idler rollers, put them up against each other to check, make sure they were the same size. I did notice on the original roller, it has the initials GMB on it, and it has Korea and Kia and Hyundai on it. And on this replacement roller, it also has GMB engraved in there. So it's highly likely that GMB is the OEM manufacturer for these rollers, and it looks like it has similar part numbers here on engraved in the roller as well. So it may be safe to say that GMB is the OEM manufacturer for the rollers on this vehicle. All right, here's the new belt with the old belt on the inside of it. They look like they're about the same thickness, and it's got a little bit of space in the loop of it because I have one inside the other. The space inside the loop is about the size of the roller. So I'm going to take them and stretch them side by side with my fingers on the outside just to make sure they appear to be the same length, and they do appear to be the same length. Now I'm going to start this belt. I'm going to put it on the crank first. Then I'm going to take it up to the front side of the motor and wrap it around the idler pulley. Then I'm going to wrap it over the camshaft sprocket. And then I'm going to leave the slack on the side over near where the tensioner roller is. Matter of fact, I'm going to put the new tensioner roller over there in place and not put the spring on it so that it has a little bit of tension on it. And then once I get the belt in place, I'm going to put the tension on it with the spring and get that slack taken out of the belt, and I'll pick back up from there. Okay, I put the spring bolt in, started it a few threads, then I tucked the spring back behind the brace there that it's supposed to be behind. As you can see, the pulley is covering up the bolt hole for the other side of it. So now, to get that pulley straight, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, then I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the screwdriver, I put the screwdriver in the pulley there, I pry it up to its loosest position like that, then I'm going to start that other screw in there and snug that bolt down with all of the tension taken off the belt, off the roller, so when I put the belt in, it won't have any tension on it until I loosen that bolt. Okay, what I did was I hung the belt down below to the crank. I put a little bit of it up here on the cam sprocket. Then I came down here to the crank and I put the belt on the crank and I put it around that roller. Then I came back up here and I made sure the belt was mostly off of the idler pulley, and then I worked it onto the crank, the cam pulley here, the cam sprocket. And once it got around there and I made sure it was on the right side of the roller down there, I slid it on to the cam sprocket here, camshaft sprocket. Then I came back down here, under here to the crank and to the tensioner, and I loosened this bolt on the tensioner, and the tensioner pivoted to the tight because of the spring. So I put a little pressure on it with my hand a couple times and let it go. Then I tighten the bolt down here, and I tighten the bolt here. Now what you need to do is put the crank bolt in and turn the engine over 4 revolutions and put this crank mark back where it is. That 4 revolutions will take the sprocket, the cam sprocket, 2 full revolutions. You want to make sure that that happens smoothly so that you know that the motor is not making any contact with the valves and the pistons. And then you want to torque these bolts down however tight you're going to put them, and then put everything back together. So I'm going to go ahead and put the bolt in here and turn this around 4 revolutions and line it back up to the mark, and I'm going to go up top, make sure the top mark is lined up. Okay, I turned the crank around 4 times and it's back lined up to the timing mark, very close. Then when I come up here, I got my blue mark and I got my hole at 12 o'clock, so that's still lined up. So I'm going to check the tightness of these pulleys and go ahead and put this thing back together and fire it up. Okay, I put the dust cap on, put the crank on, and I just hand tightened that bolt down. Then I put the air conditioning belt on. I wrapped it around the bottom of the crank, put it over the pulley, took it over the top of the air conditioner compressor from up top. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten this air conditioning belt back here and get this belt on here tight. Then I'm going to put on the alternator belt, power steering pump belt. Then I'm going to tighten this crank pulley after all these belts are on. After you got the belt on the air conditioning, next thing you need to do is put the front of the water pump pulley back together. Man, so far that's the hardest thing I've done. It's like a Chinese jigsaw puzzle. What you have to do is line up the, I would suggest putting the water pump shaft at a T. Then the inner pulley goes on first. Try to line it up. Then you try to line up the outer part of the pulley, because that's 2 pieces. Then you try to start a bolt in it. Once you get a bolt started in one, you go 180 degrees, get the other bolt started with your finger. You need real small hands and a good touch. That's been the hardest thing I've done so far. Now I got all 4 bolts in there. I'm about to put this belt on over this alternator pulley onto the water pump pulley. Get that bolt in there, that belt in there, then get it on top of the water pump. Once I get that on, I'm going to go ahead and put the alternator belt on, tighten these belts up, then I'm going to tighten these bolts on the front of this water pump pulley, then I'm going to tighten up the crank pulley. Okay, got the power steering pump belt on, tighten this nut right here, tighten this nut down here so it would lock it in place. Got the alternator belt on around the crank, tightened it down there, tightened the bolt behind it, then I went underneath and tightened the bolt that I loosened down there by the oil. Okay, I'm getting ready to dig into this timing belt. One of the first things you may want to do is jack the car up, pull the tire off, pull the splash panel off from in front of that harmonic balancer or the crank pulley, and break that crank pulley bolt loose. That way you have these other belts and things wrapped around that crank to try to help keep it still. Okay, I had put my belts on when I was finished with the timing belt before I put this front top cover on the timing belt, and I couldn't get the cover on with the power steering belt on. It was in the way, so I had to take this back loose, take the belt off out of the way, then I got the cover on, then I put the belt back on. So if you want to avoid doing that double step, you might want to put that cover on when you come up here before you put these belts on the front. Okay, now I got everything back together. I got the covers on. I got the mount in place. Got those 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts torqued down. I got the battery reconnected. I also plugged in the fan plug. I had unplugged that to get it the alternator bolt. The last thing you want to do is decide what you're going to do with the timing belt reminder sticker. I normally use a Sharpie to mark this with. You can use an ink pen or whatever you want to use. The belt's supposed to be done every 70,000 miles. So you could stick this sticker. It has to be a smooth, flat surface. You can stick it right here under the hood so that every time somebody checks the engine oil, they're reminded of that timing belt interval. Some people also take something like a crayon or something and they write across the top of the timing belt cover when it's due next or what mileage it was last done at. There's really no other smooth painted surface under the hood in which you can affix this sticker. So my last option to the sticker would be to come around inside the car and place the sticker in the glove box somewhere like there. So whenever they come in the glove box, they can see that reminder as to when that timing belt is due. If you feel that this information was beneficial, please like it and share it with your social media friends. Go ahead and subscribe to my page so you will get notification of future videos that I post. You can feel free to visit my website, robertspainter.com, post questions, and thanks again for watching.